Hello, today I have the pleasure of interviewing my former high school research teacher. If you didn't yet check it out, he did a podcast with me, and we had the opportunity to talk with each other about how I, as a wayward youth, found my way into
So
Providence.
weird.
And in the care of Mr. Kurtz, I found my way to becoming a computer science guy, is I believe the story. So welcome, Mr. Kurtz. I'm so excited to speak with you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I love the fact that you said you're wayward. I mean, at times you were, but other times you weren't. But I was always hopeful that you would not be wayward throughout life, which you have not become. So that's
I
good.
yeah, I'm still figuring it out, but aren't we all?
Yes.
So tell me, how did you take those first steps towards becoming an educator? Did you know it from the beginning? Did you have parents who were involved in that kind of field, or did was there a particular
No.
moment that changed it for you?
Okay. That's a really great question. So I grew up in an area, I grew up in Toronto, Canada. My parents are Canadian, first generation. And I lived in a neighborhood where it was an intensely a lot of first generation Canadians, and therefore there was a lot of pressure on kids, to be successful, right? It was driven, and when I was in high school or even littler, you there was you had to be you were sort of guided to be a professional, right? Like what you had to be. It was just part of the water we drank, and my parents worked really hard, and we weren't wealthy or anything like that, but they came from poverty, really, my parents, and they wanted to up the game. It's what you call the American dream, we call it the Canadian dream. So basically, what happened was when I was in high school, I was surrounded by incredibly dedicated and hardworking young people. And most of them were there are three professions basically: accountant, lawyer, doctor. Those were the three things that everyone was aspiring to be. And so I was such a confused youth because I loved biology in high school, and if you love biology, you were going to medical school, right? So um, and I was very interested in the environment. Like I don't know, even at an early age, I had a lot of interest in that, in life and wildlife and all that kind of stuff. Because my father and I, and my brother and my sister, we did a lot of camping. We loved to be out in nature. We were boaters. We fished. It was kind of rare for our neighborhood to do that. But anyways, um, so I was destined to be a doctor, but I'm not sure I was smart enough to go to medical school. But so when I went to college, university, I went to the University of Waterloo, which is a very cool school. Anybody in computer science will know the University of Waterloo because it's very famous and well known for a lot of important languages and a lot of important people who went there. But I was a biology major there and environmental science. I also played basketball. Okay, so that was another reason I went to Waterloo, because I was a basketball crazy basketball player. I love basketball, and I played for the team there. But anyways, um, so while I was there, I was thinking, what am I going to do? I had no real course. I said, you know what? I want to go. I'm going to be I'm going to apply to law school, because that was one of the three possibilities for me that I thought, right? So I got into law school, and I guess it was in my. So in Canada, you can apply early. So I applied like after my sophomore year, got in to a law school, and oh, my father was like incredibly happy. Like that was his dream for me, right?
So, was this law school a school within the University of
No, it
Waterloo?
was a different school. It
I
was
see.
because they didn't have that. It was a different university.
Yeah, to respond to your earlier comment, I certainly have heard of Waterloo. It's consistently one of the best places, particularly for game development as well, but just computer science in general.
Yeah.
And a big reason why is because they push their students constantly to be doing these internships and contract work as part of their education.
Yeah. Um, that was called the co-op program.
Co-ops, yeah, sorry, yeah,
So you
that's
went to
yeah.
school for half a year and or for one semester, you alternated it between work and, but I wasn't in the co-op program,
But
but
so you were doing biology in university, kind of on the doctor track, and then you switched off, like you were pre med, and then you said this isn't
no, I
working.
wasn't on pre-med. We didn't have that kind of stuff. I was just taking biology and environmental science with no real reason or understand. Thought I was going to be an environmentalist, whatever that means, right?
But I guess why didn't it click when you were taking those biology classes in those early years at Waterloo? Why do you think you weren't saying, "Gosh, this is me. This is what I want to do for the rest of your life," to such an extent that you decided to pivot completely into law?
I didn't want to be a lawyer, and I wanted to be a biologist, but I felt an inner pressure. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, because my parents had such a big effect on me and all my friends, oh, you're only a biologist, you bum, that kind of thing. So you failure.
Wow.
It wasn't like that. And probably no one thought that. It was just me thinking that, you know what I'm saying? And then, but I had the last laugh in a way. But anyways, so I just thought I was not, I don't know. I just felt really depressed after I got into law school. And I thought, I don't want to do this. I love what I'm doing. I love studying stuff. I love bugs and all kinds of stuff like that. And just, it was like the first kind of decision I made for myself, that moment when you said, boy, I'm really not my parent. I'm not what my parents want me to do. So then I said, you know what? I'm not going. I want to do what I love. So I had no idea what I was going to do. So, anyways, it's a long story, but when I was when I was in my senior year, or my junior year, I really got interested in mosquitoes. And I had this professor. He's still alive, and he's still one of my mentors, Dr. Smith. And to me, he was the most influential person in my life in terms of education. And he was incredibly brilliant, and he saw a lot in me that I didn't see. And so what happened was he helped me a lot in senior year with some research projects that I got involved in with mosquitoes and everything. I thought it was fascinating. And then I also had the opportunity to, well, that goes back later, but I had no idea what I wanted to do after I graduated. After I finished college, I actually went to Israel, and I lived in Israel for over a year. Um, and I just wanted to go there and just learn Hebrew. And I just wanted to go. And I got a great job. I was studying mosquitoes in a town called Beersheba, which is a very famous town if you read the Bible. And I worked with mosquitoes there. It was a great opportunity. And then I had to come back, and I'll never forget that flight home was the scariest, most depressing flight in my life because I was flying home and I had no idea what I wanted to do. It was like the first time in my life that I had no idea. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, that's a very scary thing.
Did you know when you were taking this job in Israel that it would be part time, like it was a contract of sorts, and it
No,
ended?
I just found the job when I was there,
Yeah,
and I had to end it because I wanted to come home.
you wanted to come home, but you didn't know what was going to happen once you got
I
home.
had no idea. It was I was on that flight. I was terrified.
So what is the driving force behind, like you don't know what you're going to do there, and yet you felt compelled to go to Israel anyway, and then you
Well, I
felt
wanted to
compelled.
go just because I had a curiosity about that country, and um, I'm Jewish, so um, it was just a driving thing. I wanted to go so badly and see what it was like, and but I would have stayed, but I really am close to my family, and I don't think I could have ever separated from them. So I come and I'm looking outside of the plane over the vast Canadian wilderness, and I'm going, what the hell am I going to do? I'm looking, maybe I'll go out and hike around Canada or something in the wilderness. And I got home, and I was just like, what the hell am I going to do? And then all of a sudden, when I got home, I called like Dr. Smith at Waterloo. I just said, hey, I'm here, I'm home. I just, without just saying, just catching up. And then he asked me to come to the school, the campus and visit. So I went to visit him. And he asked me, he said, Rich, I really think that you would be a great candidate to do your master's with me. And I said, what the hell are you talking about? Because I had no conception about a master's stuff. I had no idea. Like I wasn't like in tune with that kind of like PhD master's stuff at all. And I couldn't believe it. I said, wow, this is amazing. You're going to pay me. It's not going to cost me any money. You're just going to let me come take the courses and learn and become a science, learn more science. I said, hell, I'm not doing anything. I have nothing else in my life. So sure. And it was funny because when I went home and told my parents, my mom goes, oh yeah, before you left, Dr. Smith asked me about that. If I think I would like, I said, why didn't you tell me? I spent like months just like with a knot in my stomach, not knowing what the hell I was going to do. And well, she didn't realize it. But anyways, I spent 3 years in doing my master's degree at Waterloo. And it's funny when you talk about the computers because in the mathematics building, there was a central area where the computers, like it was like, those computers, they were huge and they had those tape drives, like backup tape drives. When I started using computers, I used cards, right? You had to program using cards and it, but it got really sophisticated because then they had those terminals like all over campus that you could use, right? No one had laptops or anything like that. You had to use the campus computers. And there's something called like Gandalf box. Do you know what a Gandalf box is?
No, I don't.
Look, when you get it, when you get a chance, look it up. It's really funny. It's this little box. It's a blue box, and it had like a little toggle switch on it. And every computer had a Gandalf box. And so, in order to get a pipeline into the mainframe computer, you had to flip the switch and you had to keep flipping it until the light came on, and that meant you got a connection.
Okay.
So it was really hard because if it was during the day and there was a lot of kids using the computers, you couldn't get on. You see all these kids like whacking, going crazy with these stupid toggle switch. Oh, damn it, my light's not going on. So I ended up like going on to like campus at like 2 o'clock in the morning because it wasn't used that much, and I just had no patience to wait
So you
to
needed
get
these
online.
computers for your biology work.
Right, because when I was writing my thesis or you know calibrating my
And because
data,
of
it
all
was
these kids flipping the switches,
there's
you
just too many kids
you
using the
became
computers.
you moved into the vampire hours because
Exactly. So I would get up so early in the morning, come to campus, do all the because I was doing a lot of lab work and field work. I mean, I was out in the woods collecting mosquitoes and getting getting. We had an assay. It was called the. It was really. It's funny. You because mosquitoes are most active a half hour before and a half hour after sunset. So I'd go out and then I would have my arm exposed and I would capture every single mosquito that would land on me that was intending to bite me.
oh wow, that's how you catch them by putting your arm in harm's way.
Yeah, because I was doing it like a population analysis, so I needed to know how many mosquitoes were there, and then I would have to identify the different species. So I would take this thing, it's called an aspirator, and it goes in your mouth, and you literally suck the mosquitoes into like a little tube with your breath, breathing in, and then you put the mosquitoes in a little cage, and then you take them back to the lab. And this is like you're up late at you're late at night, and you put them in the freezer, you kill them, and then you identify them under the microscope.
So how many mosquitoes do you reckon you kidnapped by
Oh, thousands.
just
And then
manually?
yeah, because I was doing that for 2 summers, and there are certain times of the year that you would do it.
Do
Obviously,
you let them free after you?
No,
Assess them?
no.
Okay, they all, you just
No,
kill them.
because they freeze them. And then I had another technique. I was looking at snow melt mosquitoes. These are mosquitoes that emerge after the snow melts, and it's the water causes the eggs to the larvae to hatch from the eggs. And I was also sampling and doing population studies on larvae and stuff like that. But anyways, I'll get finally, this is a long story, but um, so at the end of my career, I said, oh, I think I might want to do a PhD. And so I started applying to different schools to do my PhD in entomology, specifically mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are pretty big um, field because of diseases they carry and so on. And so I got into some places, and I think it was the University of Wisconsin. I was very interested, and they asked me to come down and visit. I was going to get my ticket and everything. And by this time, I was not married, but I was with my future wife, and I think I did get married after, like, at the end of my career as in college. And then, like, it was one of those things, it was like that lawyer feeling. I said, do I want to do a PhD? I mean, do I want to spend another 5 years in university and, like, and do I want to get grants and, play that whole game? And I saw how hard that was, with all, in academia, it's hard, to get money and stuff like that. It's not exactly like they're pouring money out to mosquito biologists, right? It's not a lucrative field. So I said, the thing that I loved about being a grad student above all else was teaching, because I had the opportunity to be a TA, teaching assistant in laboratories. And also my professor got ill during my tenure there, and he asked me to take over his graduate statistics course, which was pretty intense because, these are older people who were taking a stats class. And he asked me to lecture and take that and do that. And I loved it. Okay. So I knew deep down inside, like, this is what I really love teaching. This was what I found. So
This was the first time you had really
yeah, I
tried.
never considered it even. Like, I mean, as I said, in high school, if you told your friend that you wanted to be a teacher, you were out of the group. So, so it was like a low life job. I hate to say that, but it's true. I mean, it isn't a low life job, but it was considered that way. So, anyways, that's when I kind of knew. And I didn't want to go to college. I would love to be a university professor, but I didn't want to go through the PhD process. So I decided to move to New York because that's where my wife's from. And I guess started in New York was because it was easier for me to become a teacher in New York than in Ontario, Canada. It would take less time. And that's how it all started. Then I just got into being a teacher, and then I kind of loved it. Taught at a school called a private school because I didn't have my professional certification in New York yet. So I spent 2 years getting that. And while I was doing that, I was teaching at a private school. Then I worked at Huntington High School. That was my first public school job.
Is public school more prestigious?
It's not more prestigious. I think probably private school in certain ways is it just pays more money. And there was no way I could survive and bring a family up on Long Island on a private school teacher salary. So I went to Huntington. I would have never left private school, although I'm really happy I did. And then I taught at Southside High School in Rockville Center. And then my final gig was at Comac High School in Comac, New York. So that was a long, long story, but I really loved teaching, and I knew that was what I had to do.
All
And
right.
it took a long time to learn that, but I guess I had to go through everything else to get to that point.
Well, thanks for sharing that history, because now we could dive into it and start understanding the pieces. So let's talk with that with the end first. I guess you had these three gigs you mentioned: Southside, Huntington, Comac. How
And
long
Woodmere, four
in
schools I taught
Widmer?
at.
So how long were you at each of these schools? And when it came to those transition periods, where a lot of things usually are interesting that happen at transitions, like what was kind of the motivation or like factors you were considering in between kind of taking the new job versus staying where you're currently
Oh,
at?
that's a good question. I'll tell you, for each case is a little different. So Woodmere, I taught there 2 years, and the salary for private school is really not helping. I couldn't live on it. We're living, I couldn't do it. So I moved to a public school, which increased my salary. Not by much, but it was sort of a projection. I could see like, okay, you get certain amount, you grow. So at Woodmere, it was, I mean, at Huntington, it was great because I was introduced to some, at Huntington was my real learning experience because as a first year teacher there, I got all the worst classes, like really poorly behaved students. And I really wanted to quit because I thought, what is this crazy? This is madness. But I finally, that's where I figured out how to be a teacher, with really tough kids.
Okay,
And,
wow,
and
so much to talk
I,
about there.
and I learned, I read every single book about how to discipline because in teaching, the first thing is you got to have control, right? Because you can't teach anything or do anything unless you have control of the classroom. And I think the first 2 years, I did not have good control. But I read every single book, talked to tons of teachers, took courses, and I finally realized the way that you can control a class is you have to use different techniques that you read about, but then impose your will or your personality. So I am not a person who yells or screams at kids or anything like that. I think I control the class with humor. I found out that I could be funny, and it was a way of connecting with students, um, without making them feel like that I'm creepy or bad or mean. Um, but I learned like you have to be calm as a teacher, and then when you get angry, it's best to plan it. Like, so for example, I'll say, you know what? Today I'm going to go crazy. Like, I'm going to scream and yell today. Like, not to do it it it's a reaction to something that happens, because then you lose control and that's it. So you need to say, today is my crazy day. You have to flip out, like, and that helps, because if you're always calm and then one day you just go nuts, you throw a chair, you break something, it has an impact. Whereas if you do it every day or you're doing it out of like emotion. So I learned that you have to plan crazy. And that was at Huntington. I loved it. I met some great, amazing teachers. Um,
I want to.
One teacher, Mr. House, who was an AP biology teacher, was really my inspiration because he got me to be an AP biology teacher, which really was important to me. And then a little bit later on, I began to think about starting a science research program there. And I started a science research program in Huntington, and that's where I started to do that. And then I went, I said, at a certain point, okay, so a lot of teachers stay at one school, they'll be there for 30 years, whatever. I was really fortunate because I didn't want to do that. I felt like at a certain point in my career, I've been there too long. I know everything. It's not new. I'm getting bored. There's no challenge. I wanted to go somewhere where, I need to relearn how to take attendance. I need to know how to grade. I need to teach new subjects. So I got an opportunity to teach at Southside High School in Rockville Center because they have what is called the IB program, which fascinated me. And I got to start a new research program because they were looking for a research program teacher, a new one, because they didn't have a research program there. So I spent 14 years at Huntington. I spent 8 years or 9 years at Southside High School in Rockville Center, which is a great school. And then finally, I ended up at Comac High School. And the reason I left Rockville Center was because, first of all, it was very far from my house. So I was traveling an hour and a half, 2 hours a day, one direction. So Comac was a lot closer to where I live. I also loved, I knew the assistant superintendent at Comac, and I met him previously at Wooden at Southside High School, and Comac had a research program. It was a great program, but it was falling on a little bit of a hard time, and they needed someone who had IB experience, which I did, IB bio, and then they wanted someone to help improve a pretty great, like a good program that they wanted it to be better. So that's how I ended up at Comac. And I was there for 8 years, 9 years. I don't
Okay,
remember.
I got a lot of follow up questions on that.
Sure, sure.
But I didn't want to interrupt you too much. But just one on the very tail end of that. When you said they wanted it to be better, who was really driving that progression at research? Like who's behind the Comac research renaissance, saying, "Hey, we've got to put money into this because we want our kids to compete at an
I wouldn't
international level."
I wouldn't say it was. I don't want to bring up any names,
Okay,
first of all, but I can positions. People like the superintendent and the assistant superintendent wanted to improve the program because all around that school and other districts and so on Long Island, there was, there's a fierce competition. Science research means a lot to school districts. And I feel like they wanted to improve the outcomes. And so they asked me to help with that. And I was lucky because they had some great teachers at Comac High School. So it took a lot of work at the beginning to convince people that we could be really awesome, and there had to be a lot of discipline and so on involved. But with the team that we had, I knew it was gonna work.
so what? Okay, interesting. I admire your confidence. How did you like? How did you? Well, let me ask you this: Was your performance relative, like measured based on like how many students you could like get to into the competition or something like that?
I don't think so. That was one thing that every school that I was at, there was no, oh, I mean, they may have thought it, but they never said it. I never felt ever pressurized because I think for most places, because they started at a lower spot, it wasn't like I was taking over programs that were already very successful. So any incremental improvement was really respected. So I felt like they knew the kids were getting a lot out of it. I was just really blessed that way. I never felt pressure. I
So
mean, any pressure that was there was totally my pressure on myself.
so within the Comac High School, I believe it's the case that you can take actually credits like units into science research. Like it could be part of your daily schedule. Is that right?
Yes.
So was when you started teaching, was that already in place?
Yes. The only thing was at that point, there was a smaller group of, there was very few older students. There was a core of amazing students in ninth grade and 10th grade. That particular year that I came there, for some reason, it must have been that year, a cohort of kids was really outstanding. I mean, there were sometimes you get one or, a few great kids, but there were so many top students that year for some reason. Um, and that made it even easier because those kids were so motivated that it was unbelievable.
So what were kind of the ways that you approached this challenge of trying to build up the program? Like, what did you concretely do in order to improve it?
Um, Not just at Comac, but even at the other schools that I taught at. I think I had raised the expectations on what we should expect from students, and like I think a lot of times research sometimes before I came was more like a lark. It was like you take it. There weren't major consequences to things that you did or things like that. So I think making it a graded kind of class where, there was consequences for not getting stuff done. And I think basically it was easy to make it work eventually because once students started doing really well, it generated a lot of interest in the community and among the parents. And then the kids said, yeah, this is pretty cool. Like going to a science fair is great, but getting awards is really cool. and being recognized for all that work you did. So I think it fed off itself. I think it was just the initial, like, I think wherever I taught, there was always 1 year or 2 years that you had to clear the crap. You know what I'm saying? Like, because there could have been a teacher before you that was like, had a certain style of teaching. Like, I remember so clearly at Rockville Center, like, my first year there was a disaster because they had this teacher there before me that was so different than me. He was a great teacher, I think, but he was totally not like. And then, so in IB, you take 2 years of biology, let's say, right? Higher level. So you take year one and year two. So I would have a group of students that already had that teacher, and now they had me. And they said, this blah, blah, blah didn't do it this way. It was really bad. They were really challenging me because my style was so different than the other teacher. But the younger kids didn't care because they never had another teacher before, so that was easy. But I was pulling teeth when I was involved with that.
That is such a curious thing about this profession is that there is so much, as you say, style to it, and that you can achieve, similar or just as good outcomes, kind of approaching it from, I guess, a very different way. So, what was the process of you sort of finding your teaching style?
I think the process, as I said before, is I did a lot of reading and observing other teachers, right, and talking to other teachers who were much more experienced than myself. They were very good teachers, like I could tell. And I kind of like picked the things from all these different people, kind of like just wrote it down or put it in the back. Hey, I like that way that person did this. I think that works for me. So I would pick and choose, like, I think it's like anything. You just observe great people and
What
you try and emulate what they were like, and then, or what they did. And then you kind of like overlay your personality.
Yeah, I'd love to get some better resolution on that. So, like, what were some of those example things that you took from another teacher?
Um, well, there was a great earth science teacher at Huntington. And I wanted to quit school, and I wanted to quit teaching because I had the worst kids. I couldn't take it. And he said, don't worry, Rich, I'm going to tell you, these are things you could do, you know, like certain kinds of rewarding certain things, like to sort of use as rewards for certain kinds of behavior, and planning your class, and like sort of don't be such a hard, I'll say this, I shouldn't say, but don't be a hard ass. You're not going to win over these kids by being mean. They're not the kind of kids that respond to that. So it was just like, I realized that that's my personality is kind of like quiet. I mean, not boisterous, but having an incredible amount of fun and doing goofy stuff. Right. So I began to feel like, okay, I could teach and work hard and help kids, and then just, oh, I'm just going to bring in something from home or do something silly today. And I think they began to appreciate that because they would see the humanity in me. And I think that was one thing. And the other thing is, I feel like for any teacher, um, there's a famous saying, and I think it applies to everything. It's, people don't care what you know, they want to know that you care. In other words, it you're whatever all this crap that you learn, all this information that you have in your head, kids don't care about that. They forget about it all the time. But they want to know that you care about them. So I feel like that was very important. Like to sort of have empathy, and like not to be mean or something, but not to be too, like, it's like a balance, like you can be nice and everything, and understanding, but then you have to, and I think people appreciate that. I think my students really appreciate the fact that, what, I didn't get my homework done. Kurtz is going to call my parents. So that was another thing. I felt like I needed to connect with the parents. So I did at the beginning of the year, especially, and throughout the year, I would call every parent, introduce myself, And that was actually quite comical because I'd call up and I'd say, "Hello, Mrs. Blah blah blah, Mister Whatever." All of a sudden, there'd be like 2 minutes of no talking. What did he? What did, what did you do? What did he do? I says, "No, I'm calling because I love your daughter. I love your son. They're great and they're really working hard. And I know maybe they're struggling, whatever." Like, or you get on the phone, "Joey, come here. Your teacher's calling you." And they would be floored. And that was always a very positive thing because if you have a student that never gets a good report, and all of a sudden you call their house and you say, you maybe the kid was doing really crappy stuff, but one day he handed in his homework, I pick that up and call because that was a way of getting the student on your side because he says, Mr. Kurtz called my parents, and it was the first time ever that anyone called my parents with good stuff because all the time it was negative. So I felt like that was a big thing that I did a lot of. I talked to parents a lot and tried to get them involved
Mm.
and make me,
Yeah, I don't know if you called my parents. I'm sure you did, but I appreciate, because certainly having had the privilege of being a student of yours and a quasi student for a year prior to that, because we kind of did most of my science research
yeah,
projects
yeah.
kind of
We had
out.
fun. We had a lot of fun.
We had
I
a
mean,
great time. Yeah.
I enjoyed, you came to the office, we went on the phone, we called all those people and
Yeah.
just talked a lot. Yeah, I think we really clicked because
Yeah, we had.
I didn't have to waste my free periods having this snot-nosed teenager named Matt in my office, but I enjoyed it. So I learned so much from you. So
Yeah, there was a lot. There was a lot of moments where you just like hook up the phone with me in Canada, and I just had to.
and
I'd be talking to these people.
you would say stuff that I would just be dying. Oh my God, I can't believe you just said that.
Oh,
It
geez.
was you'd make me so nervous, but it was fine.
Yeah, man, I don't even know if I'd get along with the person I was in high school. That's a whole nother story. But here, I want to ask you about that because, man, you had such a really unique style, and I think that is something that really set you apart for a lot of your students, and they really appreciated that, as you call it, humanity. Because I remember I had moments where I'd find another student kind of hiding behind these giant trifold poster boards that they do for science fairs. And I was like, why are you hiding here? He's like, Mr. Kurtz, he's gonna get me. He knows I didn't hand in my abstract or whatever. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we got refugees hiding out.
It's funny because I think so they felt guilty. I feel that's another reason why anybody who wants to be a teacher, if you work as hard as the students, they know that you're working hard. I know, Matt, you knew the teachers who were lazy. And I think that produced lazy kids because why should I do all this work when I know they're not even going to look at it or something like that? I feel like it was a lot of work on my part, but I felt like I had to do that. That was my job, right?
Um, okay, a few questions that popped up. So one of the things that you said, following up on this style, was you said being funny was a really important part of your style. So you're dealing with a population, these young people who are constantly on the latest trend. So how do you keep your comedy relevant for that kind of group of people where it's literally a totally different group every year, all these different preferences and stuff like that?
That is a funny question because I think I did the opposite. I did not want to stay with the trend. I'd always be like 4 or 5 years behind. So, in other words, the students that I saw when they were in middle school, that would be my thing. So, like, I'd use words like gnarly or groovy, or, I'd remember the things that they would have been thought were cool in middle school, or the music. Like, I would have One Direction, and I just play like, or I'd play music that I loved when I was a kid, or really, that was another thing that I felt was really cool. I felt music was a great connector, and the weirder, stranger the music, the better. Like I would bring in like music from like Indian music or or just like, old rock and roll, or, Michael Jackson and stuff, like stuff that like that was fun. Do you know what I'm saying? So like I always had music blasting a lot in my classroom. So I feel like I think they appreciated it more when you were more like, I forget the word, like sort of obsolete, but it
Yeah.
would say, "Oh, Curse, I can't believe it," like, or like disco was my big thing. I'm sure you remember that. I had
Right.
a
So
disco
yeah,
ball and
maybe
everything.
yeah, maybe the word is like an anachronism, like out of
Exactly.
time.
I felt like if I emphasized disco, like, and stuff that was like old, I think that was more appreciated.
Okay, so I understand the funny. Tell me about that other side because you said it seemed just as important sometimes to be crazy. Maybe you have a stunt one day of the week. So I'd love to know kind of what that looked like for you. So maybe I can get some ideas at work. So people could
Like,
take me a
for
bit
example,
seriously. Maybe I
like,
gotta throw a chair or something.
exactly, like I'd have something like placed strategically that I knew that I was going to bang or something, like, so I planned it before. Like, I wasn't going to kick a chair unless I knew it was safe. I wasn't going to try and kill a kid or something. So I'd say, okay, I'm strategically saying that these kids have been really lax lately, not doing their homework, or, taking advantage of my good nature, which can happen, right? Human nature. And then I just explode. I just say, what the hell? And I would throw something or whatever and just be really angry. And I was angry, but I was controlled. I was controlled anger because I wanted to make my point. And then I would just go off and I wouldn't talk to anyone. I would just say, here's your assignment, just do it. And I just mark papers or sit there, and I wouldn't say anything. The kids would be, oh shit. Like, they would be stunned. And I would not do it often because I think if you do it too much, it loses its effect. But once or twice or three times a year, when the students were getting a little antsy or taking advantage of my goodness, I'd have to bring the hammer down, you know?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't usually like look at one kid and be angry with them. I didn't try and like make someone feel bad or something. I try to make it more collective so that, that they wouldn't, this one kid wouldn't feel terrible.
Gotcha.
Unless someone did something really stupid and or insulted another kid. And that was another thing, I think. I never, I mean, I probably did out of anger, but for the most part, I tried to talk to any problems, any students that were having problems with me or whatever, like quietly somewhere else, so no one knew. Because the teenager gets so embarrassed when or anyone gets embarrassed when you sort of, point them out or a bad thing they did. So collectively, the class was getting rambunctious, go nuts, do something crazy, and then individually, you just talk to them.
So you mentioned when you were on some of these work places were pretty far from your home. How did you occupy your commute time?
Oh, I love sports radio. So it was just interesting because like this famous radio station called WFAN, Sports Radio 66. I was actually there at the beginning of that, start of that, when I was commuting. So I started getting crazy. I love sports radio. There were some really great personalities. And then later on, when I got a CD in my car, or I don't think maybe I used the cassette tapes too, because they had cassette tapes in the car. Books on tape, like I, I would say books on tape. So you go to the library, you get a book. Like, so I listen to a lot of like amazing classics that I just listen to books
Yeah,
because I would
I
never,
love listening to audiobooks.
because
I
I
have
think
all
those
the apps now.
audiobooks are awesome. In those days, you had like the cassette. So it was funny. They would say, they'd have like a little thing at the beginning of the thing. In case the cassette is not working, take the cassette and like bang it on the dashboard and then see if it works. I thought that was hysterical. Smartly bang it on the on the
Smartly bang it.
dashboard and then put it in and see if it still works. It was that because in those days you'd rent them from the library.
Yeah.
You'd take them out. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
another thing. I just have to say, during my career, one of the most weirdest thing was the evolution of technology because I really overlapped an evolutionary stage of education because when I started, there were no computers in the school at Woodmere. We had a photocopy machine that, oh, I didn't even have a photocopy machine. I had something called it was like a mimeograph. Do you know what a mimeograph is?
No.
So you'd have to type your assignment or class list or whatever class assignment on on a regular typewriter, and it had carbon, like, so it would make a blue ink would be impressed on a sheet as you typed, and then you put the blue inked machine thing into a machine called a mimeograph, and it would turn, and that was how you made your copies. And your hands would be all blue and you'd be a mess, right? Because the ink would get everywhere. And that's how I started. In fact, I don't know how the hell we ever existed without computers. So then, and then finally, they got a photocopy machine, and it was terrible because it would break every minute. So you'd be sitting there and you'd get like 10 copies, and then it would, start to smoke. It was terrible. The technology was so bad, and there were no computers. And then all of a sudden, like the first computers that came out were like IBM. And with those computers, when you turn the computer off, you lose all your work because there was no memory in them. Basically, you had those 5-inch floppy disks, the real floppy disks. You know what those are?
I've seen them, yeah.
Yeah, because they were floppy. You could move them. So you had to make sure that
Oh,
you
actually,
saved.
the floppy disks I know aren't floppy. They're hard.
Yes, those are the second generation.
Oh, I only know the second
The
generation then.
first generation floppy disks were made out of a plastic, and they were 5.5-inch squared. And look it up. And they were floppy because you could do this with them. So you had these floppy disks and you'd put them in the computer and they would save your stuff, hopefully. And then you come back to class the next week. Because when I worked at Huntington, they asked me to teach. So, oh, can you teach? They had a class in word processing, PFS. It was an old word processing method. Sure, I can do it. It was easy. It wasn't hard to teach it. But they started the computers and that was their use. Their use was to do like, you know, like, you know, editing and just it was amazing stuff. When I look back at it, it was terrible. But I was still using film strips. Do you remember film strips? These are these like little, oh my God. Um, so we had films. So every school had like a film library where you get like 16 millimeter films. You play those because you didn't have like internet or anything. And then you had these film strips were these little things. It was like a machine, and you. At one time, the technology got so advanced on the film strips. They had cassettes that went into them, and then every time you had to advance a film strip slide, like they had little like pictures, it go beep, and you had to turn it. But then it got so high tech that it went beep and it automatically turned, so you didn't need to turn it yourself.
Lovely. But at least it
But
beeps to let you know. Let you
film
know how
strip,
much work it's
film
saving you.
strips, film strips, and then laser discs. These are these huge like laser things that were like, I can't believe it. This is going to change teaching, and it was amazing because you could it was crazy.
So you saw all these different transitions.
Yeah, like
Was it
I
ever
saw.
hard for you to try and adapt to the new thing, or did you see
Well,
coworkers
they
of yours who weren't able to keep up with this rapid development?
I, I think some of the older teachers had difficulty, but I think the good thing was there was always training. like at every phase. So like, oh, here's how to use this or that, and so at that time we would go for training. Like if we got, let's say, Apple computers, like Apple. So you at my other one of my schools, like first one was IBM, and then Apple. It was called the Apple IIc or something like that. That was a big advance. And so every generation there were new kinds of computers, and um, you just got trained. You just learned. And then, yeah, I can't believe how the change, it was just unbelievable. And I feel like really blessed to have gone through that, because that was a real revolution. Totally weird. Like totally weird.
Awesome.
What changed, yeah.
I one of the questions I had for you was I wanted to confirm or deny some rumors. Okay, so I think at one point you had a Wikipedia page. Do you know anything about that?
I've heard about that, but I have no idea. I've never seen it.
I tried to look it up. I don't know if it exists anymore because I think there's a page for the high school, the Comac High School, and there was a like a notable alumni section. And I know that one of them was this comedian who I didn't know too well, a female comedian. I want to say right now like Melissa McCarthy, but I don't think it
I
was
don't
her. I
know.
don't know who it was, or maybe it was
Yeah.
a Dunham or something, but it was like some comedian that you would see on television, and then there was Mr. Richard Kurtz as the notable persons, not
I'm
alumni but
sure one of
persons.
my former students did that, because
You had some jokers.
there's nothing, I'm not famous for anything.
Well, I believe it's the case that there's a star named after you. Is that true? Or dedicated to you?
Yes, yes. That's an interesting story. So when I was at Huntington High School, in fact, I interviewed one of my students on Teacher Talks. Her name is Jessica, and amazing student, brilliant kid. And so she was a so you there's a competition called Regeneron. Before that, it was called the Intel Science Talent Search, which was before that, it was called the Westinghouse competition. For most of its history, it was the Westinghouse competition. It's the biggest, most prestigious science competition in the States, and there was only for 12th graders, right? So Jessica did a project, and she was selected as a finalist, and then she went to the nationals. And I think what they did, for the student could get select someone that was influential in her for her, and she picked me. And then I think they gave each person that they selected, they named a star. I have it upstairs in one of my drawers.
Wow. Perks
I
of
have the
teaching. You
certificate.
got
I
gifted
should,
a star,
yeah.
which is
I mean,
implicitly a solar system, maybe, I think. Right? Every star's
well,
got a
the
little
thing is,
system.
there's so many stars that there's hundreds of billions of stars. So
Someone's tracking them, I guess. I mean,
I
who
don't know.
knows? Maybe they recycle them every
I
thousand
think
years.
it's probably a gimmick. They probably had to pay like a bunch of money, and it's just I probably got this star probably has like 30 teachers named after it.
Yeah, it's
I have to check it out. I'll have to check
contested
out the
real estate
yeah
in the
the
Milky Way.
Astronomical Society of America to see if it's real legit.
All
I
right,
never
well, it's
checked.
good. It's good to know that that is verified true.
Yeah,
So there was another thing I heard, which is that, and the details of the story are very fuzzy. I don't know if this was hearsay or I found this on Wikipedia, but it was this story that you were working at some sort of testing facility where they were doing some bad tests on rats, and that you, under the cloak of midnight, broke into this facility and freed these rats, and that you had a run in with the law as a result of it. Is there any truth to that? You saved these animals or
I
something
have
like that?
absolutely no idea where that came from.
Okay, total fabrication then.
It's total fabrication.
Yeah.
I've never worked in a lab with rats.
All right. I don't know. So nothing
Although,
about that story sounds familiar. There was no.
no, there is a funny story about rats, though.
Okay.
When we were trying to sell our house, we had this apartment, which was not really, I mean, it was okay to have, but it wasn't, we couldn't sell the house. We divided the house into an upstairs and downstairs. Actually, that's how we bought it, right? And we wanted to sell the house, and it was a one family house, and we had like sort of a kitchen upstairs because we were renting it. The only way we could afford to live in a house, first house. So what I did was, because they have an inspector that comes, so I took all the stove out, I took the refrigerator out, everything, and I turned the upstairs. This is so stupid. I turned the upstairs apartment into a laboratory for the inspection. So
Wait,
basically,
and why is it? Why would the building code not allow a kitchen, but they allow a laboratory?
I didn't think that way.
Okay,
So
but
I
but why do you think this at all? Why was there not
because
allowed to
I
be a
was
kitchen?
afraid that we would get denied and then we'd have a hard time selling the
Okay,
house.
got it. So having a laboratory would help you slide under the radar.
Yeah, I thought maybe they would see it. So I took all the kitchen stuff out. I worked at Huntington at that time at Huntington High School. I asked the the computer person if I could borrow a couple of computers, take home, which they allowed.
So the biology teacher's taking home a couple of computers. Okay, what
Yeah,
was the? Why did you say you needed this stuff?
I just say I have some work to do. So
You have work to
I
do on multiple computers.
I figure if it's going to be a lab, it has to have two computers. So, anyways,
Okay, right.
took home two computers, took some glassware home, like some chemistry stuff, test tube holders and stuff like that. And somehow I don't remember how I got a couple of rats
From
in a
where?
cage.
From the
In a
school?
cage. I just don't remember. I don't think I got it from the
You
cage.
had a rat guy?
I think my friends' kids
You
had
called him
rats or
up.
something. I threw the rats in this mock lab, and it was it was hysterical actually. I had some log books out, some like pencils and papers to make it look like it was being used as a sort of a home lab. And it passed. But I'm actually sure the guy or the person that came to the house probably saw right through it, but they felt so bad for me that I would go to all this trouble to try and fool them.
He saw all the trouble and he's probably thinking like
I,
they're
I
cooking
can't
meth
screw
here
this
or
guy up
something.
because this guy really wanted to sell this house.
This
So
guy's hiding something for
that's the
sure.
only time that I recall engaging with rats.
All right, well, it's good. It's good that you didn't get any trouble for that. I
No,
guess
I didn't.
you evaded the inspector.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
I didn't evade him. I just convinced him to
Well
let us
done.
be able to sell our house with less hassle.
Hmm. Well, the last topic I wanted to ask you about is a passion that I know is very dear to your heart, and that's your practice of beekeeping. Can you tell us a bit about how you fell into this wonderful, interesting hobby? Well, clearly now we know the backstory. You love insects. You're an entomologist by some trade, right? So
Yeah, by
is that
training.
a big part of it?
It is somewhat. The way that it happened was interesting because my wife was really the original beekeeper in the family. She wasn't keeping bees at the time because we didn't live in a place where we could keep them at the time. But she applied for a job to be a New York State beekeeper inspector for this region, for Long Island and up in Westchester. So she got this job, and when you're a bee inspector, you're going into people's hives and you're checking for diseases and so on. There's one particular disease called American foul brood, which is a disease that's pretty devastating. And if you have it, you have to basically burn your hive. You have to get rid of it because it's very easily spread. So I went with her to all these various inspections. During the job, she got pregnant. And so it became more difficult for her to lift and stuff. So I had to do that. And I got really interested through her. And then um, when we moved, we decided we could have a couple of beehives. And I joined the Long Island Beekeepers Association and I got really interested in bees. And I would say I've been keeping bees probably for like almost 40 years, maybe a little less. But um, yeah. And recently I became a master beekeeper, which means that I took a 2-year course from Cornell University to really learn more about bees. And yeah, I love being a beekeeper. It's fascinating, fun, interesting, always learning new things, meeting great and interesting people. And I have hives here where I live. I have 4 hives. I don't want to get big. I'm not looking to make money or anything like that. In fact, this year we had a really good year for honey, and I decided to put a sign up in front of my house and put some jars of honey out there and just say, take it and pay for it. And it turned out to be a real hit in the neighborhood. And I got a chance to meet like a ton of people in the neighborhood and became much more friendly with them where I live. I live in a country rural area. So it was really nice. Like people would drive to my house. We'd start talking. I'd meet a lot of new people just because they like the honey. And it sold out. In fact, people want more and I don't have any left. So it's too bad.
Wow, that's awesome. That's really cool. Is that your main, would you say, retirement hobby, the thing that keeps you busy, or what are some of the other ways that you're occupying your time now after retiring?
I'm the kind of person that can never retire, like in this sort of, traditional sense of what retiring is. Basically, I can't sit still. I always have to be doing something. So I started a website, a blog, a
Podcast?
podcast. I'm doing a lot of beekeeping. I love gardening. We have a beautiful piece of property and I love working outside all the time, chopping wood, you know, carrying rocks from one end of the property to the other end of the property, digging new garden beds. Um, in a way, I think I'm doing too much, but and plus we have grandchildren now, so that's another new exciting part of my life, which is unbelievable. And yeah, yeah, I don't, I'm not, I never have enough time to do everything that I want to do. And I still work. So I work as a consultant for high schools.
Well, it's fantastic that so much of your work is, inherently kind of sharing a lot of your insights and passion for learning and teaching with other people through the podcast, the website you mentioned. So as we close this out, why don't you tell anyone watching where they can check out what's the latest in your world, your podcast, your website?
Well, my podcast is Teacher Talks with Kurtz. So it's on like all the Amazon and Apple and Spotify. So Teacher Talks with Kurtz. And my website is K, what is it? K12? Oh, K12stemspace.com. K12stemspace.com. It's not that I'm making any money from these ventures, and I'm not getting let's say that they're not going viral. But I just do it because I like talking to people and reminiscing. I just interviewed Matab. I don't know if you know Matab.
Matau Shawnee.
Yeah, I just interviewed him, and he's currently a professor of mathematics at Columbia University,
Wow, that's
and
awesome.
he's
I'll have to
got quite.
listen in on that
Yeah,
episode.
I'm working on that right now. But he 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 and his friend he graduated from as with a PhD from MIT in mathematics, and his I think he was even an undergraduate student. He solved some kind of mathematical problem that no one could get for like 70 years, and him and his friend figured it out. So he's quite the cool kid as you are. So
All
I'm
right.
so
Well,
happy
there
that
you
I
go,
got.
folks. That's
I
the
hit,
ad right there. Don't you want to hear
yeah.
about that amazing young man, Matab? We gotta check out that podcast. So we'll try to link it in the description.
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you very much for your
Thank you,
time.
Mr.
I
Kurtz. It
love
was my
talking to
pleasure.
you.
Thank you.